In the heart of London, where historic cobblestone streets weave through towering skyscrapers, the city tells a tale of old-world charm clashing with modern ambition. The evening air is crisp, tinged with the scent of rain-soaked stone and distant chimney smoke. Streetlights flicker to life, their golden glow reflecting off the rain-slicked pavement, casting long shadows that stretch and dance with the passing footsteps of hurried commuters. Tucked away in a quiet alley, hidden from the grandeur of the city's wealth, stands a modest workshop. The wooden sign above the door, once proudly etched with "Thomas Woodworks," is now faded by time and weather. Inside, the scent of sawdust and varnish lingers, mingling with the warmth of a dimly lit lantern that barely keeps the room from falling into darkness. Tools lie scattered across a well-worn workbench, their edges dulled from years of relentless use. Thomas, a self-taught carpenter, sits hunched over a nearly finished piece, a beautifully carved chair that speaks of patience and precision. His calloused hands run over the smooth curves, his eyes tracing every detail with the scrutiny of a master artisan. He exhales, the weight of unseen struggles pressing against his chest. Each piece he crafts carries not just his skill but his story, a story of long nights, silent sacrifices, and an unyielding determination to prove that artistry does not require a diploma. A sudden knock at the door breaks the quiet hum of the workshop. Thomas hesitates, his heart quickening slightly. Visitors are rare, and at this hour, even rarer. Wiping his hands on his apron, he moves toward the door, the floor creaking beneath his deliberate steps. As he pulls it open, a uniformed courier stands under the glow of the flickering street lamp, his polished shoes gleaming against the worn cobblestones. "Delivery for Mr. Thomas," the man states with mechanical politeness, extending a crisp envelope sealed with an elegant emblem. Thomas takes it, the fine parchment foreign against his roughened fingers. Before he can ask any questions, the courier nods and disappears into the misty night, swallowed by the city's unrelenting pace. He closes the door and moves toward his workbench, the envelope now heavy with unspoken possibilities. With careful precision, he breaks the seal, unfolding the letter with a mix of curiosity and caution. The script is refined, the ink dark and unwavering. "Dear Mr. Thomas, we are pleased to invite you for an interview at Prestige Furnishings, a company renowned for its excellence in furniture design. Your craftsmanship has come to our attention, and we believe you may be a valuable addition to our team. Please join us at our headquarters on Monday at 10 a.m. Sincerely, Edward Harrington, Director, Prestige Furnishings." The words settle over him like an unexpected gust of wind, cold, thrilling, uncertain. Prestige Furnishings. A name that echoes through the world of high-end design, synonymous with luxury, wealth, and status. Thomas's grip tightens on the letter as he glances around his humble workshop. The shelves lined with unfinished projects, the stacks of rough sketches pinned against the walls, the battered stool he had carved as a child, each item a chapter in his journey, a testament to years of labor and learning without a teacher. A war rages within him. The invitation is an open door, yet doubt lingers like a shadow. He has never set foot in a place like Prestige Furnishings, never spoken the polished words of those who belong in its corridors. He is a craftsman, not a businessman. A worker, not an executive. But then, beneath the unease, something steadier takes root. A memory of every customer who had run their hands over his creations and whispered, "This is art." A reminder that skill is not dictated by wealth, that passion cannot be measured by the pages of a resume. The city outside hums with the rhythm of its endless march forward, carriages rolling, footsteps hurrying, conversations blending into the night's chill. Thomas straightens his shoulders. Opportunity does not knock twice. As the candle on his workbench flickers, he sets the letter down, his gaze fixed ahead. Monday will come soon, and with it, the moment to prove that hands, not just heritage, can carve a legacy. The morning sun barely peers through the thick London fog, its pale rays swallowed by the heavy mist that clung to the city like an unshaken memory. The streets, usually bursting with hurried footsteps and the clatter of carriage wheels, moved at a slower, more uncertain pace. Thomas pulled his coat tighter against the damp chill, the rough wool scratching against his neck as he exhaled a breath that curled into the air before vanishing into the mist. The letter from Prestige Furnishings was folded neatly in his pocket, a presence both reassuring and ominous. He had read it so many times he could recite every word, yet doubt clung to him like the fog itself. This was no place for a man like him, no world he had ever belonged to. His fingers brushed the rough edges of his calloused palm, a stark contrast to the smooth, ink-laden hands he imagined would be waiting for him inside that grand building. At the corner of the street, a small tea shop bustled with life, its warmth spilling into the cold air through its half-open door. The rich scent of strong brew and buttered scones curled into the street, inviting him like an old friend. The thought of delaying his arrival, even for just a few moments, felt tempting. "You look like you've seen a ghost, lad." Thomas turned to see the shopkeeper, an elderly man with a face carved by years of laughter and hardship. He was wiping a teacup with the ease of someone who had done it 1,000 times, his eyes sharp despite their age. "Not a ghost," Thomas murmured, glancing at the folded letter in his pocket. "Just a future I'm not sure is mine." The man chuckled, placing the cup down with a soft clink. "The future doesn't belong to those who stand in doorways. You either walk in or you walk away. But standing still, that never did a man any favors." Thomas hesitated, then nodded. The warmth of the shop was tempting, but the weight of the invitation was heavier. With a deep breath, he stepped back into the mist, his boots clicking against the damp pavement as he pushed forward. As he neared the towering glass structure of Prestige Furnishings, the city's noise seemed to dim. The grand building stood against the gray sky, its windows reflecting a distorted version of the world around it. The entrance was lined with pristine white columns, polished so brightly they seemed to glow. A doorman, dressed in immaculate uniform, barely spared him a glance before opening the heavy glass doors. Inside, the air was thick with an unfamiliar scent, a blend of fresh linen, expensive wood polish and something intangible, something that smelled like wealth itself. The walls stretched high, adorned with artwork that whispered of quiet extravagance. The floor gleamed beneath his boots, too clean, too untouched by the kind of work he was used to. A group of well-dressed candidates stood near the reception, their laughter a quiet hum of confidence. Their suits were tailored, their shoes unscuffed. They spoke in crisp, effortless tones, dropping names of prestigious academies and mentors Thomas had never heard of. "Father says Mr. Harrington values pedigree over talent," one of them mused, adjusting the cuff of his sleeve. "He doesn't have time for charity cases." Another chuckled. "Well, he certainly won't waste it on someone who can't even read a blueprint properly." The words brushed against Thomas like the cold wind outside. They were not spoken about him, not directly, but they didn't need to be. He could hear the truth in them, the way they hung in the air like a locked door he had no key to. "May I help you?" The receptionist's voice was polite but distant, her gaze flicking over his simple attire before settling on his face with the careful neutrality of someone who had judged him already. "I have an interview," Thomas said, steadying his voice as he pulled the letter from his pocket. The fine paper, once crisp and clean, now bore the faint creases of nervous fingers. She took it with a practiced smile, scanning the details before nodding. "Right this way." As he followed her down the long hallway, the polished floors reflected his every step, each one an echo of his own uncertainty. The voices of the other candidates faded behind him, but their words lingered. Some doors were built to be closed. But Thomas had never needed a door to build something great. He only needed his hands. The office was silent except for the soft, rhythmic ticking of an ornate clock mounted on the far wall. The deep mahogany panels that lined the room absorbed the light from the crackling fireplace, casting shifting patterns of orange and gold across the high ceiling. The scent of aged wood, polished leather, and something faintly metallic, perhaps the ink from the gold-embossed contract stacked neatly on the desk, hung in the air like an unspoken authority. Thomas stood just beyond the threshold, his fingers pressing lightly against the seams of his coat, grounding himself in the texture of the fabric. His boots, scuffed from years of labor, felt too loud against the gleaming marble floor, a stark contrast to the plush Persian rug where the director's chair sat, a chair as commanding as a throne. Behind the desk, Edward Harrington barely looked up. His silver cufflinks caught the firelight as he flipped through Thomas's portfolio, his expression unreadable. The man was in his mid-50s, his salt and pepper hair combed with the precision of someone who controlled every aspect of his world. His suit was perfectly tailored, the fabric barely creasing as he turned a page. The silence stretched. Thomas cleared his throat. "I appreciate the opportunity to be here, sir." Harrington hummed, finally lifting his gaze. His eyes, a shade too sharp for someone pretending not to be judging, settled on Thomas with quiet scrutiny. "Self-taught, are you?" "Yes, sir." "No formal education in design, no official apprenticeship, no academic background in structural engineering?" Thomas had expected the question. He had rehearsed the answer. But now, standing in this grand office, it felt different. More weighted. He lifted his chin slightly. "No, sir. But I've spent years working with my hands, understanding the nature of wood, the way grain flows, the way it resists and bends. I believe craftsmanship is not only learned in books." Harrington gave a slow nod, his fingers tracing the edge of a page in Thomas's portfolio. "Perhaps," he mused, "but prestige is learned in books." He shut the folder with an air of finality, tapping it twice against the desk before pushing it aside as though it held no real weight. Thomas felt the shift immediately. "You see," Harrington continued, leaning back in his chair, "our clients pay not just for quality but for certainty. They want assurance that the hands designing their furniture belong to someone with credentials, someone who has been trained in the proper institutions, who has learned under the right names." He steepled his fingers, glancing once more at Thomas's work. "Your craftsmanship is competent. But competence alone doesn't sell." A flicker of something hot, pride, anger, defiance, ignited in Thomas's chest. He forced himself to remain still. Another voice chimed in from the far side of the room. "And yet, the old masters were self-taught." Thomas turned to see a younger man lounging in a chair near the bookshelves. His suit was just as expensive as Harrington's but worn with an effortless ease, the top button undone, the tie slightly loosened. His dark eyes studied Thomas with something different, curiosity rather than dismissal. Harrington sighed. "James, this isn't an art museum. It's a business." James Harrington, his son, most likely, leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "So we deny talent because it doesn't come wrapped in the right packaging?" Harrington didn't answer, merely watching Thomas with the cool patience of a man who had already made up his mind. James exhaled, turning back to Thomas. "Tell me, if I gave you a block of wood right now, could you craft something better than the designers we employ?" Thomas met his gaze, steady and unwavering. "Yes." Harrington chuckled, low and disbelieving. "Confidence without proof is arrogance, Mr. Thomas." "Proof comes from action," Thomas replied, surprising even himself with the certainty in his own voice. "And I'm ready to prove it." A pause. A flicker of amusement in James's eyes. But Harrington only shook his head, reaching for the brass pen holder on his desk. "That won't be necessary." He scribbled something on a notepad, tearing off the sheet and handing it to his assistant without looking up. "We appreciate your time, Mr. Thomas. You'll receive our decision soon." It was a dismissal. The assistant stepped forward, already gesturing toward the door. Thomas clenched his jaw but nodded. He had seen this before, the polite rejection, the subtle but firm pushback into obscurity. As he turned, James's voice cut through the air once more. "Father." Harrington raised an eyebrow. "Give him a trial project." A flicker of irritation crossed Harrington's features. "James. Let him build something," James continued, leaning back again, as if the entire exchange was a game to him. "If he fails, he walks away knowing he wasn't good enough. If he succeeds, he let the words linger." Harrington sighed, rubbing his temple as though this conversation was beneath him. Then, without looking at Thomas, he gestured to the assistant. "Give him the brief." Thomas exhaled slowly. It wasn't a job. Not yet. But it was a chance. And that was all he needed. The workshop assigned to Thomas was nothing like his own. It was too clean, too sterile, too perfect. The air smelled of polished metal and industrial-grade varnish rather than sawdust and sweat. The workbenches were pristine, the tools lined up with military precision, untouched by the kind of long years that softened a chisel's grip or dulled a blade's edge just enough to make it familiar. The space felt foreign, impersonal, like a museum display rather than a place where real hands carved real things. A single block of wood sat in the center of the bench. Oak. High quality. Unmarked. A blank slate in every sense of the word. From the far end of the room, muffled voices carried through the glass partition. Behind it, a handful of designers observed him, their expressions ranging from bored amusement to thinly veiled skepticism. Among them stood James Harrington, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, the hint of a smirk tugging at his lips. Beyond them, further still, was Edward Harrington's office, its heavy doors closed. Thomas knew the man wouldn't bother watching. He had already decided the outcome. This was nothing more than a formality, one last flicker of entertainment before the inevitable rejection. Thomas rolled his shoulders and exhaled. If this was a game to them, then he would let them watch. But he wasn't here to entertain. He was here to prove. He ran his hands over the oak, feeling the grain, the weight, the way the wood spoke without words. He didn't need blueprints or careful sketches. The design had already formed in his mind the moment his fingers touched the surface. Time moved strangely after that. The first cut of the chisel was always the most important. The angle, the pressure, the way the blade met the wood, it all determined how the rest of the piece would take shape. Each stroke was deliberate, each motion carrying the confidence of years spent understanding not just how to carve, but how to listen. The wood told him what it could become. He merely guided it there. Minutes bled into hours. The rhythmic scrape of blade against wood filled the workshop, a steady, relentless cadence. At some point, the voices beyond the glass fell silent. The amusement faded. The designers no longer whispered to one another, no longer exchanged knowing glances. They just watched. And Thomas worked. He lost track of time. He barely noticed when James slipped into the room, moving closer, observing not with condescension, but with something else, curiosity, maybe even respect. At last, when the final shaving curled away from the blade and the last detail was smoothed into perfection, Thomas stepped back. Before him stood a chair. But not just a chair. It was elegance carved from simplicity. The curves, the angles, the subtle balance between strength and grace, it was a piece that didn't need a name to be recognized as art. It spoke of skill, of precision, of an understanding of form that no textbook could teach. It was a craftsman's signature without ink. James exhaled, running a hand over the smooth surface. Incredible. The designers murmured amongst themselves, some nodding, others still unwilling to acknowledge what was in front of them. But it didn't matter. Because Thomas had already won.